wanted to take a look at a pretty interesting CNN segment, taking a dive into how people are feeling about the Trump transition so far. Harry Anton breaks down the numbers. Let's take a listen.
President Trump's transition net approval. You go back to November of 2016. Look at this. It was just at plus 1 point. Just at plus 1 point. That is well below the historical norm. Look at where we are today. Significantly higher, plus 18 points. That's 17 points higher on the presidential transition net approval rating. The bottom line is this. If 8 years ago Americans were lukewarm on Donald Trump, at this particular point, they're giving him much more the benefit of the doubt. A lot more Americans are in love with this transition. This much more meets the historical norms where normally presidents get that boost coming out of their victory. And what we're seeing here is Donald Trump's presidential transition is getting a thumbs up, and dare I say, 2 thumbs up from the American people.
So, Emily, what do you make of those numbers and how significantly different they are from 2016 when it was, people were not really sure what was going on with him?
Harry Anton just pounding that ghost energy, clearly, day in and day out.
You're feeling that, huh?
Yeah. So I don't know how much to read into what this reflects of sentiments of the American voters, but I think where we can focus is the change. I do think seeing 2016 versus 2024 is interesting. And I wonder, Krystal, again, sort of contra conventional wisdom in Washington, if it's that, the Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is not a man of the conservative movement. Tulsi Gabbard is now very much in the conservative movement, but does not come from that place. Mm-hmm. Trump's cabinet in 2016 was staffed with vanilla Republicans. I mean, he put Rex Tillerson in there, and I guess that was interesting. It wasn't a very drain the swamp move to just pluck the Exxon CEO. It's one of my favorite Trump moves in terms of actually undermining the drain the swamp messaging. We'll just take the CEO of Exxon and put him at the State Department and have fun with that.
That is the definition of the swamp right there.
Yes, it's so stupid. But on that note, he was pretty much surrounding himself with conventional Republicans. And this time around, I can see how, A, people just have higher name recognition, maybe, and B, they're coming from different places. So you're maybe getting a little bit more. For example, Cory Booker has said he'll take RFK Jr. seriously, and that's maybe one of the most high-profile cabinet announcements. So it's one that people have heard a lot about. And I think Bernie Sanders has had nice words for Tulsi Gabbard in recent days. So there's something.
Really? I missed that.
Yeah, I think I have to go double check, but there's something where you've had people reacting in a way that's sort of okay, maybe more people are hearing about different parts of the coalition coming together. That's my best guess as to why it's higher.
Yeah, my best guess is there are 3 pieces here. Number one, Trump is just a fixture in American political life now. So he is, there are a lot of young people who have only known the Trump era. He is not this aberration in American politics at this point. So it makes sense that he would enjoy the sort of typical honeymoon period that all presidents enjoy, because now he's sort of a typical presidential figure. Even as, if you look at historical norms and his approach and whatever, obviously he's outside of that. But in terms of recent political history, he is now just sort of this is the norm in American politics. So I think there's that. I think the second piece related to what you were saying is the Democratic Party approach has been very different. We're going to cover in another block how the quote unquote resistance has gone quiet. The vibe from the Democratic Party in a lot of corners is more capitulation than resistance. And just as we saw with, the numbers on immigration, when you had both parties sort of accepting the same ideological framework around immigration, you saw the numbers really dramatically shift. I think it's the same thing. If you have both parties basically saying well, he's making some decisions that I'm okay with and I'm open to, et cetera, then yeah, you're going to have a public perception that this seems to be going pretty well. And then the last thing, and I actually think this is probably the most important point, is that Joe Biden is so feeble and the Democratic Party in general is so feeble and incapable of making a decision and taking any action. Just the sense of there's a lot of things happening and a lot of decisions are being made. I think irrespective of whether those decisions are good, bad, or indifferent, just the sense of action feels good to people. That someone is doing something and making decisions and they're bold and they're controversial and they're taking charge. Now, does that last once those decisions actually have real world consequences, as we were talking about before with the tariffs and the way that deportations may feel in reality versus how you imagine them to be in, the abstract? That's a very different question. But I do think that people are reacting to just this sense of like decisions are being made and they're being made quickly and they're being made decisively. And, that vibe, especially in contrast to a completely enfeebled Joe Biden, is creating a really positive impression.
Yeah, the point about Biden is a really good one. And I think actually what people were recirculating was an old Bernie comment about Tulsi. Obviously, they used to be very close, so I retract that statement. But,
okay.
The point remains, it's obviously people who come from different parts. It's not just a bunch of vanilla Republicans who are being slotted into these cabinet positions this time around. There are, of course, some vanilla
They're not
Republicans.
vanilla, that's for sure.
That's for sure. I think that's right, Krystal, that some of it is just a comparison with the Biden administration. And the only other thing I was thinking of is you were talking that was interesting is if you remember back in 2016, there was a frenzy every single day about all of Donald Trump's tweets. And he just posts into the ether on Truth Social now, like even sometimes on Twitter. And they're not making news cycles like they used to. There was just this sense of horror and norm shattering that you were talking about how he's been normalized and the country's been sort of acclimated to Trumpism. But even just the way that could be shifting public opinion, because those is worthwhile to think about, because those individual tweets, I mean, Paul Ryan would make a news cycle by his non-response to the tweets back in that time, like 2017. And now it's like we all just understand that Donald Trump is posting into the ether and that's how it's going to be. And we don't have to panic over everything he says.
Yeah. My memory is not all that great, but I also remember in 2016, all kinds of like sort of chaotic things happened. That weird like dinner with Mitt Romney and drama around Kushner and Chris Christie. And so I'm sure that also didn't feed like the most positive impression of the competence with which the transition was unfolding. Because I mean, I don't think they thought they were going to win. So they were really dramatically unprepared to go forward and actually staff an administration. And I think that kind of showed. And this time around, they did expect to win and they have been preparing to win. And, so he was ready out of the gates with here's what I'm going to do. Here's who I want. This is how we're going to do it. This is the policies we're going to put into place. These are the day one executive actions. And like I said, when those things actually hit and we see these people leading agencies and these, executive actions going into place and what they actually mean for the country and people's lives, it may be a very, very different story. But right now in the abstract, it's like, oh, he's taking action. That's what I want him to do.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I think that's true, Krystal.
So I wanted to get to this, Emily, and get your thoughts on this because I think this conversation is very interesting and also has really important implications for the future of both the Democratic and the Republican parties, which is that some people have been floating this sense that Trump may be kind of a unique figure to the Republican Party in terms of the coalition of voters he's able to pull together in the same way that Barack Obama was a unique figure in the Democratic Party with the coalition that he was able to pull together. One of the earliest signs of those parallels, and obviously we're not saying they're like the same ideologically or stylistically, just in terms of their sort of political impact, uniquely felt political impact in coalition building. One of the earliest indications we got of that was after election night, we saw there were a significant number of voters who voted for Donald Trump and didn't vote for anyone else, left the rest of the ballot blank. We saw the way that even though Donald Trump was able to obviously be very successful for himself and, win the popular vote and win all the battleground states, he didn't really have big coattails. Most of the Senate Republican candidates in the swing states lost. The exception was McCormick in Pennsylvania, where it was extremely, extremely narrow. And it was a similar thing with Barack Obama. Actually, in 2008, Barack Obama did have significant coattails, but after that, he was famously unable to translate his popularity into popularity for the Democratic Party. He was not able to confer his popularity onto his would-be successor, Hillary Clinton, et cetera. And so it does raise this question of whether Donald Trump is this sort of unique figure in the Republican Party and whether moving forward, whether it's J.D. Vance or Ron DeSantis or whoever is the standard bearer going forward, whether they will be able to keep together this very unique coalition that has come out for Donald Trump.
I mean, this is the trillion-dollar question. It's so significant because I cannot envision another Republican being able to do what Donald Trump did on Rogan, being able to do what Donald Trump did on Theo Von. Obviously, J.D. Vance literally did that, but it's not Donald Trump, and it's not Donald Trump in Florida getting a significant percentage of the vote and getting new demographic shifts and all of that, and then a big chunk of the state also voting to legalize weed and enshrine abortion rights in the state constitution. I just don't know if there's another Republican waiting in the wings. That Donald Trump is just singular. And that's in some ways a compliment to him. And in some ways it's like Republicans are totally screwed after Trump because there's nobody that could do the Madison Square Garden rally that has, and by the way, having watched the entire thing, like, was the Tony Hinchcliffe thing helpful? Probably not. But it was very, there was something really politically amazing about seeing these random people coming together under the banner of Trumpism. They don't really care about the Republican Party.
Yeah.
That's the most significant problem for Republicans right now. I don't think it's Don Jr. I just don't know that there's anybody that can do what he did.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things, the parallels too between Trump and Obama is obviously Trump is a celebrity, right? Has been known to American public for decades as a celebrity. Obama wasn't a celebrity, but in a certain sense, he kind of was. Like, he ended up being more of a celebrity figure, this sort of, especially in 2008, this kind of like political rock star figure that people thought it was like cool and edgy to associate with. He was only in the Senate for how many years before he ran for president? So he became more of a cultural figure. And you see that in his post-presidency too, than a typical political figure. And so in some ways, I think they also share that in common. And, I don't want to this can sound like cope from the Democratic side of like, all right, well, we'll just get Trump out and then we're going to be good again. And I don't think that's true. I think the Democratic Party has a lot of problems that they have to work through. And they also don't have any like Obama level popular figure, as we're going to talk about how Kamala Harris is thinking maybe she'll run again. They've got a lot of work that they need to do, and they need to find much more compelling, controversial, like outspoken, charismatic, funny, whatever character that can carry the mantle for the party. So they've obviously got a lot of work to do. But I just remember in 2008, and I felt this too, because I voted for Barack Obama. I actually voted for Hillary in the primary. That's kind of cringe. But anyway, I voted for Barack Obama.
But she was running on a strong, progressive, pro-union, like she was doing it.
Yeah, well, I thought she was better her healthcare plan was better than his. But anyway, we'll put that in the past. We'll put that in the past. We'll put my cringe Democratic Party views in the past. But, when he was elected, there was a sense of like, it's over for the Republicans. Like, they're never going to win again. Look at this coalition here, but look at young people. Look at like all these shifts towards the Democrats. Look at him winning in Indiana. Look at him winning in Iowa. Like, these groups, the coalition of the ascendant, it's only going to get larger. And Democrats are only going to win larger and larger victories. There was this sense that it was like, it was over for Republicans. And it wasn't just Democrats that thought that. Like, Republicans kind of thought that too. They were like, damn, we're kind of screwed right now. And then 2 years later, 2010 comes around and massive shellacking in the midterms. Obama obviously is able to get himself reelected in 2012, just as Trump was able to get himself reelected this time around. But in 2016, guess what? Donald Trump comes to town. So I guess the point here is just that the triumphalism, the sense of inevitability that exists right now, a lot can change in politics. Let's put A9 up on the screen that just shows the shifts from 2012, which, talk about bracing for the Democratic Party. Look at the way that since 2012, these are the shifts towards Republicans. Black voters, R plus 19. Hispanic voters, R plus 29. Asian voters, R plus 17. Other voters, R plus 17. White no degree, R plus 13. It's kind of funny because that's the group that is portrayed as having shifted the most. And they're one of the groups that has actually shifted the least. So that's kind of an interesting note. But non-white with a bachelor's, R plus 21. Non-white, no degree, R plus 37. So, these shifts, obviously, if they continue, like the Democratic Party is basically dead. But 2012, of course, the last time that Barack Obama was on the ballot. So it's pretty wild to see how much can change in politics just over the course of a single decade.
Well, and again, I just don't think there's anybody who's getting the votes of, all of these people in Florida, for example, that are going to vote to enshrine abortion into the state constitution. I don't think JD Vance is getting as many people as Donald Trump is, and that's going to matter. Donald Trump looks like he's going to win the popular vote, but by a tiny margin. So it's not an insignificant thing. And if we put a 10 up, this is a Financial Times analysis that I think is maybe a little bit flawed, about how Democrat political elites, as they put it, have started to diverge culturally from the median voter over the course of the last 10 years. And what they're using as cultural issues, it's a lot of immigration and policing in particular. And we've seen this in other immigration analyses that it's just been really significant, the drift. But also one of the things that the Financial Times has found in this analysis is that Democrats are perceived as no longer being associated with the working class. They're being associated more with sociocultural issues than with class and economic solidarity than they had in the past. And the only other thing worth mentioning here is that the drift on cultural issues between elites and your median voter was especially acute with minority voters. And so, that's policing and immigration are two very obvious issues where you would see that divergence. And I don't know, Krystal, I think Democrats are probably on track to find a better way to have those conversations. And I say better politically. I'm not talking about better necessarily in substance, but that to me doesn't seem to be such an incredible Sisyphean task ahead of Democrats to at least message better on those issues.
Yeah, sometimes I think that this screen in particular that we have up right now, it can be a little misleading because you could pull a totally different set of issues like, abortion with no exceptions, getting rid of IVF, still
Gay
not
marriage.
supporting gay marriage, which are all positions that many Republicans in the party today still hold. And it will also be dramatically unpopular, dramatically out of step with the public, not to mention, stop the steal, also dramatically unpopular. So in some sense, it's a race to figure out which candidate can overcome their unpopular positions. And I think the second graph that you were talking about gets much closer to the core of the problem, which is the issue isn't necessarily where they poll on this or that issue. It's more that they have been successfully, because they have abandoned a lot of their working class orientation on economics, they become associated solely with those cultural positions. So, obviously I use the example of Bernie Sanders, but I do think it's a really illustrative example. Bernie Sanders is as left on any of these issues as you can effectively be. And yet he has so much credibility on working class issues that people are like, yeah, but I know what he's really concerned about. And it has a lot to do with me and my family and how we're going to get ahead. Andy Beshear, another example of that in Kentucky, right? Kentucky, very, very religious and very conservative state. And yet he actually vetoed some of the anti-trans legislation that was coming out of the Republican legislature, knowing that would be very unpopular. But people voted for him anyway and reelected him in the state of Kentucky because he had so clearly delivered for them on affordable health care, on jobs, on union jobs in particular, attracted a lot of auto industry investment into the state. And so they felt like, okay, well, yeah, he's, I don't agree with him on these issues, but that's not really what he's all about. So, I think that piece about Democrats need to be associated first and foremost with delivering for the working class. And then you can get some leeway, just as Donald Trump does on the issues where he is saying things that are profoundly unpopular. Then you can get some leeway on those pieces where public opinion goes against you.
Yeah, Trump, first of all, handled abortion in a way that I, again, cannot see, because he's Trump, right? So he can say one thing one moment, then say another thing another moment, and it just, voters see him as like, he just doesn't really care that much about the issue. I don't think any other Republican is in a position to be able to handle abortion the way that Donald Trump has to mitigate some of the electoral fallout, and that's a huge challenge for the party going forward. And the only other thing I'll add to this, Krystal, is Bernie Sanders, to your point. I think this actually underscores your point. He is one of those people who has gone with the elite sort of drift opinion on immigration. And people aren't like, oh, Bernie Sanders hates the working class, because a lot of Bernie supporters aren't like, they may disagree with his position on immigration. And for example, he won states like Wisconsin, where there are a lot of people who would be totally against the Biden policy on immigration that Bernie Sanders has in some ways been supportive of, asylum policies and those sorts of things. But it hasn't been a significant sort of albatross for him during his sort of late populist rise, even though it reflects some of the drift.
Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.